Welcome to A Victim Bites Back with me, Jonathan King, talking about the Brits, whilst meeting with people who are very important in solving the false allegations industry problem. The Brits. Many of you will not remember or even have heard of my involvement in the Brits. Apart from the early days in the middle 60s, and it used to be called, I think, the British Rock and Pop Awards, quite often the Daily Mirror British Pop and Rock Awards. And of course, in those days, I used to win quite a lot of awards. I was Producer of the Year several times. Some of my records won awards and so on. Happy days. And then it came to the late 80s and I was not so much a singer anymore or a producer, but more a TV presenter. I had Entertainment USA on the BBC, No Limits on the BBC, both of which were number one in the BBC Two ratings. And I was asked to write and host and present the Brits in the late 80s, which I did, and it was a great success, great fun to do. I was rather pleased that the best male vocalist was Peter Gabriel, who I discovered when he was a teenager at Charterhouse, my old public school. Anyway, that went terribly well. So they thought, you know what? They, by being the BPI, the people in charge of putting the music show together in Great Britain, as opposed to the Grammys in the States, they decided they could make much more money by moving it from the little venue that I was in. I can't even remember where it was. I think it was in the Grosvenor Hotel in the Park Lane when I did it. But they thought we'd do much better to move it to somewhere big like the Albert Hall, and they could charge a fortune for it. And they could also do much better with somebody who was cheaper than I was. And they chose, I think, Noel Edmonds to do it the first year round, put it on the Albert Hall. And it was a serious mistake. It overran because Noel Edmonds wasn't involved in the script and the whole thing sort of fell apart. Anyway, so the next year they thought, well, they were actually going to do something much more interesting, and indeed they did. It turned out to be the biggest disaster in entertainment. So the year after I presented it and hosted it, they booked, 2 years later, they booked Mick Fleetwood and Sam Fox. At the time, Sam Fox was my girlfriend, and I was a bit nervous. She asked my advice. I was a bit nervous to say, look, don't do it. It's really not your thing. You're not a TV presenter, because she might think I was just a bit jealous that she was doing it and I wasn't. I basically said, yeah, go ahead. Why not? It was a disaster. They were only booked because the producers thought it would be a great visual shot of the tall Mick Fleetwood and the tiny Sam Fox together. And it, for one kind of visual thing, which, by the way, is the way most television and radio and media is done these days, on a quick fix being stretched to 2 hours or whatever. Anyway, it was a disaster. All the auto cue went wrong and everything fell apart. So eventually, of course, because it got slagged off like mad, and the BPI reapproached me and said, oh, Jonathan, please, can you take it back? We're prepared to pay you a fortune and a solid 10-year deal. You can get £250,000 a year for about, 1 month's work, 2 months' work. But please take it back. And I said, well, I will. And I did, just in order to prove that it could be done. And sure enough, the first Brits I did, which I think was in 1990, was a great success, worked really well. We had to have a host, so I booked Cathy McGowan, who was an old friend from the Ready City Go days. She did a great job. Second year, I think with 91, I did only voiceovers rather than a presenter, which I thought was a very good idea because it saved a huge amount of time and made us able to get in a lot of extra music, which was the important thing. And it was extremely successful. So the third year, I did even more, and I started something called the Great British Music Weekend, and we had 3 nights of different sorts of music, starring people like Ozzy Osbourne and the Happy Mondays and so on. The Cure, I remember, were on. And that was great. We featured like 45 seconds of each act, including some acts, in a little montage it was, including some acts who hadn't even been signed and recorded. I remember Carter the Unstoppable Sex Machine, CSM, were one act who we put on because I thought they were terrific. And of course they did get a record deal and a couple of hits immediately as a result of the Brits. And that was a great success. But then, unfortunately, because suddenly the ratings went through the roof and everybody loved it, the BPI wanted to take control again, especially the heads of the major labels. And they kept nagging at me to put on awful artists who hadn't had any success, but who were their priorities on the labels, which I refused to do. Went down like a cup of cold sick with the heads of the record labels, who were, of course, running the BPI. And then I sidestepped because I thought, well, I'm not doing this anymore if you're not allowing me to do what my main priority was to do, which was choose my own people to put on the show and my own format to do it, which had had great success. I remember the best success I had was getting then Prime Minister Maggie Thatcher to sing her favourite ever song, "How Much Is That Doggy in the Window?" which actually stunned the audience, and it remains. I want it written on my gravestone, please. It was such a great moment. Anyway, so I quit, I resigned, and that was the end of me at the Brits. It was also the end, basically, of the global music industry being a huge success. I'd actually come up with a name for the Brits, and it was an acronym, British Record Industry Trust Show, BRITS, which was whenever it was in 1989 or 87 or whatever. So it is actually my title, technically. I gave it free of charge to the BPI. The problem has happened now is a major problem in that most music these days is really aimed only at specialist audiences. Because there isn't anybody in the music industry anymore who can see mass appeal crossover tracks. My last two big hits were Who Let the Dogs Out, Woof Woof, and I Get Knocked Down But I Get Up Again, both of which sold millions of copies around the world. And that's the sort of thing I tended to specialise in. Mass appeal music that grandmothers loved and small children loved and that actually reached across the globe. And that was even with bands and artists like Genesis, 10cc, the Bay City Rollers, shows I got involved in like the Rocky Horror Show. These were things that I thought had mass appeal to millions and millions of people. But what the music industry has become is specialist only. So that only fans of BTS, the biggest group in the world at the moment, know the name, let alone the tune of a single BTS hit. Likewise, Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift fans, Swifties, adore everything she ever does. But actually, most people, like me, don't really know the name or the sound of a single Taylor Swift hit. And that means that the music industry has become very specialist, very minority interest, with very little mass appeal interest, and very few stars who appeal across the world. You know, you don't even get many Ed Sheerans or Adeles these days. And that's why the Brits basically has very, very limited appeal, and music generally has become just one other source of luxury involvement, as opposed to what it was in the 60s and 70s, essential. And the awards shows are also boring, the same old format. Nobody tries to do anything different. I mean, God forbid they would try and get a prime minister to sing their favourite song. Can you imagine Keir Starmer singing his favourite song? God knows what that would be. Certainly not God Save the Sex Pistols or whatever. Anyway, enough of all that. We look forward to the Brits. I still love the music industry. I do still occasionally hear mass appeal hits, but very, very few of them. I reckon the Brits will get a couple of million viewers this year. When I was doing it and when I did Entertainment USA and No Limits, we got 10 million viewers every week. Times have changed. The world goes on. See you next time around for A Victim Bites Back.